I'm still the same person. Yeah, I'm still the same person.
I don't know what you are. But I do know you. You make my fucking blood run cold.
In an interview with Vogue on September 27, 2023, Emerald Fennell had something interesting to say about her latest movie, Saltburn. It's something that gets to the core of her second film. She tells the writer of the piece, Haley Maitland, really, it's a film about first love. Generally, because I'm quite facile, I think everything has to do with sex, and I think our fetishization of the country house and titles is completely sadomasochistic. And it's similar in America. There's a world in which Saltburn could have been set in the Hamptons. But I'm utterly obsessed with how we relate to things that we want and desire, and also kind of hate and know are unattainable, things that we know will never love us back, whether that's a person or a house or a culture, and yet we can't fucking stop being desperately attracted to them. My question is, why? As a story about first love, Saltburn does work on some levels. Desire permeates so many shots in this movie, and I think Fennell pulls you into this world easily. Just as our protagonist Oliver is awed by the immense wealth and extravagance that surrounds him, first as a student at Oxford, then at the Cairns estate, the viewer is too. We see Oliver entranced and disgusted by what Felix and the Cairns as a whole represent, and soon the summer for both friends turns from one of lounging by the lake and reading Harry Potter into something much more violent. We open on a denial of love. I wasn't in love with him, Oliver says. He says this, and man, the way I did not believe him at all from the very beginning. As he talks about Felix, we see the man in question in multiple shots, all from Oliver's perspective. Looking and voyeurism is an important part of the movie, and I think that these shots say it all. There's an intimacy between the men, and when Oliver talks about all the girls that wouldn't leave Felix alone, we see him watching Felix with these girls, watching him dance with them, and even having sex with them. I like that the movie doesn't lie to us about who Oliver is and how much he wants Felix, and what Felix represents from the very beginning. Sure, you might wonder and be curious about how he got to the point of punching a mirror or kneeling in a bathtub, but the introduction really sets Oliver up as a dubious character. After all, how much can you really trust someone who claims they protected their friend and that they were honest with them when they're shown peering into said friend's window to watch them have sex? In my opinion, Oliver was in love with Felix, and there's one scene in particular that absolutely convinced me of this, and it's one I loved the experience of watching in theaters. There are a couple of shocking scenes in the movie, most of them involving bodily fluids that will make some people squirm in their seats, but the one that I really loved was the one with the grave. After Felix dies, Oliver, in his own gremlin way, mourns his friend by taking off his clothes and humping the grave. I thought this worked on multiple levels. Firstly, it's a nice contrast to the more public and typical mourning that we first see, and it also feels like a bit of revenge against the Cairns, who didn't let Oliver in on their tradition of throwing a stone with the deceased's name into the river. And of course, why would they? Oliver is still very much a stranger. The Cairns denied him intimacy, so Oliver commits a horrific act of intimacy without their permission. I think that the move was also pretty risky. For someone that has an almost Machiavellian level of cleverness, Oliver risked being caught and would have had a hard time talking his way out of that situation. It's also not a public performance like it was when he was crying in the church. This is just him and the remains of the man he loved, and it feels like something you'd see in Wuthering Heights. That idea that no matter how much you try to be closer to the person you love, you can never really have them, even in death. At the end, we also see that Oliver keeps a photo of him and Felix once he takes over the house. If he truly was done with Felix or only using him, I don't think there'd be any point in doing that. Again, there's no benefit to it or an image to uphold at this point. So, Oliver was in love with Felix. Why? The easy answer is that Felix was good looking and charming. After all, everyone loved him, as Oliver says in the opening, and it's easy to love good looking people who breeze through life. We see Oliver immediately noticing Felix on their first day at Oxford, always looking at Felix through the window. Unlike Oliver, Felix makes friends easily, and along with his cousin Folly, has already established a group of friends. Oliver's new friend, whom he ends up with by coincidence, rather than any actual interest, Michael, points this out. So you're Norman no mates too then, Oliver Quick. Michael is a weirdo, and I love him for that. However, Oliver definitely could have made other friends. His obsession with Felix prevents this, though, because if Oliver can't be with Felix, what's the point of being with anyone? At this point, I don't think it was Felix's wealth that primarily drew Oliver in, though that comes later and is definitely fused with his desire for Felix at some point. Not only is Oliver not succeeding socially, but he's not excelling academically either. His tutor is more interested in Folly, whom he knows because of his mother, than in Oliver, and we later learn that Oliver lies to his parents about being a top scholar at Oxford. I think most people heading into college have this dream of what it'll be like for them, and in one way or another, we become disappointed. We don't make the friends we think we will, or we do worse in a class than we want. And I can't imagine how this would feel to Oliver, who thrives off fantasies and lies. Felix gives him access to this dream college life, one of parties and beautiful people, of sitting with the cool kids in the pub. Although, of course, Oliver doesn't quite fit. Seen as an outsider by the others, with one girl, Annabelle, remarking that she can't sit him beside any of her friends because he's a, quote, scholarship kid who buys his clothes from Oxfam, unquote. Besides Annabelle, other people in the group don't really become friends with him, and especially not Folly, who is especially antagonistic. I think it's pretty telling that Felix never really defends Oliver in these moments. He might help him out by lending him a 20 at the pub to buy a round of shots, but he doesn't see anything especially wrong with what his friends say about Oliver, although he'll try to play the good guy and say stuff like, "Oh, that's so harsh of you to say." When we meet the rest of the Cadens, we see where this behavior comes from. Look at how they talk about Oliver when he first arrives at the estate, and look at how Elsbeth, Felix's mother, treats her supposed friend, poor dear Pamela. As much as Felix wants to be seen as the nice guy, he's not. A supposed moment of kindness in which Oliver lends Felix his bike when Felix is broken gives Oliver access to Felix's group, but it's Oliver's story that really enables him to stay there. As Oliver tells Felix about his broken family's history of substance abuse, you can just see Felix perk up. He calls Oliver an inspiration, which immediately made me think of all those people who love to put survivors of abuse or really any kind of marginalized people on a pedestal, which strips them of their humanity. It's this kind of fetishization of struggle that endears Oliver to Felix and the rest of the cats. I enjoyed that aspect of their dynamic, and it lends depth to Felix and his family, giving them an edge to their otherwise bland and simply nice personas, because in Fennel's own words, when it comes to character in general, I don't think any of us are nice. Felix, and by extension, the Can's hypocrisy, is directly challenged near the end of the movie. By the time Oliver's birthday rolls around, Felix has found out about Oliver's lies and decides to not tell his family, though he demands that Oliver leave once the birthday party is over. The party is a masquerade of sorts, which is pretty appropriate considering this facade the two men are keeping for everybody else contrasts how the masks between the two are actually off. Again, Oliver is back to just watching Felix, no longer really welcome in that inner circle. I love how Felix and Oliver's final scene together takes place at the center of the maze on the estate. There's a statue of a minotaur there which calls back to the Greek story of Theseus, the minotaur and the labyrinth. This keeps in line with the symbolism of Saltburn being a labyrinth of sorts with so many rooms and acres that it's easy to get lost in. It also alludes to how easy it is to fall into the depravity and decadence of extreme wealth, which Oliver does throughout the summer. It's a beautiful kind of irony that Oliver exits the maze and leaves the labyrinth that is Saltburn near the end of the movie, but Felix is stuck there, forever trapped as he dies in the center of that maze. And, of course, as we know, Oliver does return to the labyrinth. I could easily see a sequel to this movie being a haunted house story in the vein of something like Crimson Peak or The Haunting of Hill House, in which the decline of a family is tied to the estate. If Felix is Theseus of Saltburn, he's wandered into the labyrinth and found the monster in it, and he doesn't come back out. Saltburn works as a story about love, specifically about the intensity and obsessiveness of first love, one that might stain the rest of your future relationships. However, how much can you actually talk about desire without also talking about class, race, gender, and more? Because our desire and what we want is so shaped by those very things. We don't yearn to spend a summer at Saltburn or go to Oxford just because it's some innate desire. That is to say, desire is not apolitical or vacuous. It's because of this that I can't fully get on board with the movie, or with those that say audiences shouldn't read class commentary into it. I definitely don't think there's anything wrong with just enjoying the movie as a fun ride, but I also think that it's hard to see the movie as a love story and about obsession without thinking about how much Oliver's desire for Felix also becomes a desire for what he represents, an ease of life that's granted to cishet white men that are conventionally attractive and who, in the words of one of Felix's friends, have a title and massive fuck-off castle. Whether or not Fennel intended to put it there doesn't matter because it's there. You can do satire and make a really funny and darkly comedic movie while also punching upwards. You can talk about race, class, gender, and so much more while doing this. Just look at Sorry to Bother You, a satirical movie directed by Boots Riley that we need to talk more about, and which made me and my friend laugh and gape in turn when we saw it in theaters. Some critics have pointed this out about Saltburn, like Alexandra Jones. The moneyed upper classes are not, as Saltburn paints them, misguided bumbling buffoons. They are the people running the country and the worlds of business, the arts, the media, and if you let them, they will happily slam the door in your face given half a chance. Brideshead might have been profoundly anti-egalitarian, but it was also written a long time ago. Maybe we need different narratives now, or at least different voices spinning them. And Ned Kennedy. Saltburn possesses considerable similarity to the social satire films that have recently dominated festivals. Class commentaries have established themselves as a trendy genre. In order to stand out, new films of the genre need to present a fresh perspective. Saltburn is, unfortunately, a bit derivative. It doesn't possess a unique perspective, making it indistinguishable from other works, Triangle of Sadness, Knives Out, and The Menu, released in recent years. There's also the fact that I just watched The Talented Mr. Ripley and loved it so much that I rewatched it the next 2 days. Similarly to Saltburn, The Talented Mr. Ripley showcases the burgeoning relationship between a wealthy young man named Dickie and a poor one, the eponymous Tom Ripley. They spend days together in Italy, and Tom falls in love with Dickie and his new lavish lifestyle, but it can't last. Minor spoilers ahead for The Talented Mr. Ripley. Really, please watch this movie. The Talented Mr. Ripley does everything Fennel wanted to do with Saltburn, and it has this bite to it that I love. It understands how Tom's infatuation with Dickie is because he loves the man, but also because he loves the life Dickie gives to him in Italy. By being placed in Ripley's perspective and understanding immediately the level of poverty he's in, we start out sympathetic, just as we're supposed to with Oliver. However, as Tom does more and more questionable things, our sympathy is played with, but we're also asked to put ourselves in his shoes and wonder whether we would just go back to America, tail between our legs, to the life that Tom was living before. Dickie is also a questionable character in that movie, which adds a depth that Felix doesn't have in Saltburn. From the beginning, Dickie's suspicious of Tom, and his girlfriend Marge tells Tom that Dickie can love you one day, then pretend you don't exist. Dickie's not a good guy or even a nice guy the way Felix was, and by some respect that the rest of the cans are. We understand why Tom loves him because, come on, it's Jude Law, but whether Dickie deserves to be loved is another question. This complexity is absent from Oliver and Felix's relationship, and as a result, there aren't any interesting questions or layers to unravel about it. This complexity is absent from Oliver and Felix's relationship, and as a result, there aren't any interesting questions or layers to unravel about it, except the questions that I brought up at the beginning of this video, such as, was Oliver really in love with Felix? It's the center of the movie, but it's shallow. It's love at first sight without the intensity and complications that make it so compelling to watch on screen. All in all, Saltburn has become somewhat of a background watch for me. It's something I turn on when I need to focus on working or doing something else, but I don't feel like I have more to unravel about it. It doesn't haunt me the way the talented Mr. Ripley does when I think of one-sided relationships with all its heartbreak and regrets. It doesn't quite convince me that Oliver is a mastermind or fully win me over with its humor, like Sorry to Bother You either. So I'm left here with this movie that I did enjoy, but which feels like the Cannes estate itself at the end of the movie. Beautifully decorated, lavish, a little disgusting, but desolate. Thank you for watching this video. Let me know your thoughts about Saltburn, Sorry to Bother You, or the talented Mr. Ripley below. Thanks, and have a good day or good night wherever you are.